So, a longtime student of voting systems and electoral reform, Greg Dennis serves as policy director for Voter Choice Massachusetts. Voter Choice MA is a nonpartisan, politically diverse 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to educating the Massachusetts public about electoral reforms that increase the range of choice on the ballot and produce fairer outcomes. Greg received his BS and Mechanical Engineering and PhD from MIT, where he participates in the MIT Caltech Voting Technology Project. He lives in Arlington with his wife and 3 kids. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you that I worked up in Maine on the ranked choice voting, going around helping to bring it about. They passed it. Of course, now there's an objection saying that it's not constitutional, but this is where we want to be. Almost. Okay, I'm just filming. And it's made a difference already in the way they're talking about the elections. Because of ranked choice voting, they are saying there are candidates who are going to get elected, who are going to run, who are going to increase voter participation, because of the fact that they know every single vote is counted. And it used to be a situation where they would tell you, oh, your vote doesn't count. You're not going to make a difference. Now it does. Dr. Dennis is going to give us a wonderful explanation about what's happening here in Massachusetts. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. All right, very happy to be here. Thank you for that introduction. So, here's the outline of the talk. We're going to start with who we are. Who is Voter Choice Massachusetts? We are a nonpartisan, politically diverse 501c3 nonprofit. We educate about electoral reforms that increase the range of choice in the ballot and produce fairer outcomes for all. In particular, we advocate for reform known as ranked choice voting. And we take this politically diverse seriously. We have libertarians in our group, including Dan Fishman and Chris Crawford, who's on our executive board. We have Green Party members, we have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have socialists, we have Trump supporters. We really take the politically diverse aspect of our group seriously, and they've all come around in an issue coalition around this issue. So what's the problem? So I'm going to embarrass Dan a little bit and make him part of this problem, in a way. Here is the US House election in 2012, a race between John Tierney, Richard Tassay, and our friend Dan. It was an incredibly close election. Tierney won the election, 48% of the vote. Tassay came in second with 47%, and Dan got 5%. Now you notice here, first of all, that no candidate got a majority of the vote. No candidate got more than 50% of the vote. Because our voting system does not care if you get a majority, it only cares if you get a plurality, the most votes. And so Tierney won this election. And a number of commentators and observers looked at these results and thought, well, what would have happened if our friend Dan was not in the race? In fact, a number of them went further and said, well, the bulk of his supporters probably would have gone to Tassay. And so his presence in the race prevented Tassay from winning. That the majority, that 52% majority that did not vote for John Tierney had their will thwarted by his presence in this race. And some went further to call Dan, what word, what epithet that I think we're all familiar with? Spoiler. Here's the editorial in the Lawrence Eagle Tribune the day after. Libertarians play spoilers in 2 big races, talking about Dan's race and then the race in New Hampshire where Carol Shea Porter, a Democrat, won in a similar situation. Certainly Fishman's smaller government political ideology is closer to the Republican platform than the Democratic platform. It's safe to assume that had Fishman not been in the race, the bulk of his votes would have floated, I don't know why floated is the verb, they just floated to Tassay. And perhaps today it would be Tassay who is heading to Washington. Perhaps libertarians need to consider if their futile candidacies, which serve only to elect Democrats, are really in their long-term interests.
And the only thing you're going to be remembered for is costing Richard Tassay a seat.
You can.
Howie Carr.
Thank you, Howie. So it doesn't, we're a politically diverse group. This spoiler effect doesn't only affect libertarians, of course. One of the more well-known examples is the 2000 presidential election in Florida, where George Bush wins 48.85% of the vote. Al Gore comes with 48.84% of the vote. Got to take it to the 100th place to show the difference there. And Ralph Nader gets 1.64% of the vote. And people made the similar claim that had Ralph Nader not been in the race, Al Gore would have won the election, and that this 50.48% of the vote majority's will was thwarted again, and Nader is the spoiler candidate. So what do we do about this? Well, some people say, because of this problem, we should just not vote for third parties. Well, if you believe that, well then Penn Jillette has some words for you, the moderator of the 2016 Libertarian presidential debate. 2 words in particular, bleep you. The only way to break the system is to vote for a third-party candidate. The only candidate that's on all 50 state ballots and polling high enough to get into the presidential debates is Governor Gary Johnson. Penn Jillette endorsed the governor because he's a libertarian, but anyone should be able to support what Johnson is doing, fighting back against the duopoly that has ruined politics in this country as a crusade that all independents should be able to get behind. They just need to remember not to fall for the wasted vote fallacy. And then in November, Penn Jillette revealed, I voted for Hillary Clinton. So this is part of what the spoiler effect does. It means fewer votes for third parties. People making this calculation that it's not worth it, that they're going to spoil the election for the candidate they consider to be their second choice. And you might have concluded this effect already, but there are other effects as well. One of them is that fewer candidates choose to run under the third-party banner. Many people in this past election asked why Bernie Sanders, who had always run as an independent candidate on various third-party tickets, chose to submit himself to the Democratic primary. Well, he answered that question. What I did not want to do is run as a third-party candidate, take votes away from the Democratic candidate, and help elect some right-wing Republican. I did not want responsibility for that. And we know this of other candidates as well. So we know Ron Paul ran twice as the Libertarian presidential candidate, does not do that anymore. Michael Bloomberg has said on various occasions he would want to run for president, but he did not run this last time because it might cost Hillary the election. In Massachusetts, we had Evan Faucic run for governor on his United Independent Party as an independent, but has since switched to the Democratic Party. So we see the effect the spoiler effect has on restricting the number of candidates that choose to run, high-profile candidates that choose to run as the third party. Well, what else does it do? Well, let's look at its effect on media coverage. We already saw that awful editorial, the Eagle Tribune Libertarians play spoiler in 2 big races. How many articles do you think the Eagle Tribune wrote actually taking a look at what Dan's policies were, what issues he supported, why he was running? Anybody have a guess?
0.
0, that's right. When the Los Angeles Times interviewed Gary Johnson to figure out why he was running, this was their headline on the editorial the next day. Possible presidential spoiler Gary Johnson speaks to the Times editorial board about siphoning votes away from Hillary Clinton. Not Gary Johnson tells us about his plan for small government. No, it's the double whammy of possible presidential spoiler siphoning votes. When Gary Johnson was approached by HBO Vice News for an interview, the first question out of their mouths was, if you weren't in the race, who would you vote for, Clinton or Trump? And he lost his cool. He's, why do you keep asking me this question? So we can't get real, honest media coverage of the issues that third-party candidates stand for. It's all about how are they going to impact the major party candidates. And finally, it gives another excuse to restrict third-party candidates from televised debates. As you may know, I'm sure you're all aware that the Commission on Presidential Debates is controlled by the Democratic and Republican parties, and they frequently, in fact, since Ross Perot, have excluded all third-party candidates from their debates. The former general counsel of the FEC explained why. Well, when neither candidates want a third party in there because it's not in their interest, the debate commission is not going to allow it. They don't want candidates in there that might take votes away from the major party candidates. In George Farrar's book, No Debate, How the Republican and Democratic Parties Secretly Control the Presidential Debates, he got on the record members of the debate commission, like David Norcross, former vice chairman of the CPD. I think extra candidates just end up being tools for one of the two, so I don't like the idea. Alan Simpson, former CPD director and board member, it is obvious that independent candidates mess things up. All right, so we have, as a result of this voting, as our plurality voting system, and this so-called spoiler effect, for third parties, fewer votes, fewer candidates, worse media coverage, fewer debates. And this is all because of a voting system that is spoiled. It is not the candidates that are spoiling the system, it is the system itself that is spoiled. It's a system that fails to guarantee the winner has a majority of the vote, fails to eliminate this spoiler effect, and thereby discourages candidates from running, restricting the range of the debate the public is exposed to, and limiting our choice in the voting booth. Okay? So, what are we going to do about it? Well, the solution we have for you is ranked choice voting. What is ranked choice voting? Well, instead of allowing you to vote for just one candidate the way the system does now, ranked choice voting allows you to vote for multiple candidates in the order you prefer them. 1, 2, 3. Here's a sample ballot from the League of Women Voters in Maine. Here you just fill in the bubble of your first choice, second choice, and third choice next to the candidate. That's your first choice, second choice, and third choice. Pretty simple. In other words, it allows you to vote for your favorite candidate as your first choice, followed by a series of backup choices, second, third, fourth, etc., in the event your first choice gets eliminated. This looks like kind of a nerdy crowd, so let's go into how it's tabulated. In the first step, we take all these ballots and we just count up all the first choices. In this example, we have 4 candidates, 2 orange candidates and 2 purple candidates. You can consider these to be sort of parties or ideologies. And in each of these parties or ideologies, we have one stronger candidate, so one stronger, more popular orange candidate, one weaker, lighter colored one. One stronger purple candidate and one lighter purple colored candidate. And here we've counted up all the first choices, and the strong orange candidate gets 55% of the vote. So the strong orange candidate has an absolute majority of the vote, and if that's the case, we're done. The candidate got a majority in the first round, so it's over. That candidate wins. Just like that candidate would win today. The difference comes is when no candidate gets a majority of the vote. And here's the case where strong orange gets 40% of the vote. Now in our system today, that strong orange candidate would win. But if we take a look at these results, a majority of the voting public, 55%, wanted a purple candidate, and the majority did not get what they want. And ranked choice voting says, no, this is just round 1. We're not done yet. No candidate has a majority. So what we do is we eliminate the last place candidate, that's the weak orange candidate with 5% of the vote. And for simplicity, we're going to assume that every candidate that voted, and every candidate that votes for this last place candidate, instead has their ballot transferred to their second choice. And for simplicity, we're going to assume that everybody that voted for the weak orange candidate first ranked the strong orange candidate second. And so all of those ballots now count towards the strong orange candidate. The strong orange candidate is up to 45% of the vote. Are we done? No. No candidate has a majority yet. So we just repeat this process. The last place candidate here is the light orange with 20%. And again, we will eliminate light purple. We'll eliminate light purple, and we'll assume that every candidate that voted for light purple first voted for strong purple second. So those ballots now count towards strong purple, and we are done because strong purple now has a majority of the vote at 55%, and that candidate wins, honoring the will of the voting public, the majority of which wanted a purple candidate. And that means, in this 2012 election, if you liked Dan Fishman first and Richard Tassay second, you could indicate that. Your first choice and your second choice in the ballot. If you were a Nader supporter in Florida in 2000, you liked Ralph Nader first and Al Gore second, you could indicate that. It means that instead of Penn Jillette saying in November 2016, I voted for Hillary Clinton, and reducing the number of votes that Gary Johnson gets, instead we would see him saying, I ranked Gary Johnson first and Hillary Clinton second. It means instead of candidates saying, I'm not going to run under the third-party banner, because I don't want to siphon votes away from one of the major party candidates, we're going to see elections with more high-profile candidates running. It means instead of these media coverage that focuses exclusively on the horse race and what impact the minor party candidates have on the major party candidates, we hope to see more coverage like they have in places that do use ranked choice voting. Oakland, California is one of the 11 cities around the United States that uses ranked choice voting. Here was their endorsement for mayor. Our first choice is Kaplan, 2 Minterns are a second vote, and Kwan are third. And they go on to state all the things they like about Kaplan, but then don't stop. They say all the things they like about Toomey, and then all the things they like about Kwan. So it's no longer, this is the candidate we like, and everybody else should get out of the race, or is taking votes away from the candidate we like best. It's now acknowledging what every candidate brings to the table, what perspective they have, and why that's valuable. And instead of reasons to exclude candidates and pitting like-minded candidates against each other, we get candidates helping each other. And we've seen this in practice. San Francisco has used ranked choice voting since 2004. The East Bay Times noted in one of the very first races that with this new system in place, candidates for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors have been campaigning together, trying to win the goodwill of each other's supporters. It now makes sense. So whereas under our current system it makes sense to exclude other candidates and prevent them from getting into debates, now Richard Tassay wants Dan Fishman in that debate because he wants those Fishman voters to get out to vote and likely vote Tassay second. Al Gore wants Ralph Nader in the debates because every Nader voter is, according to that calculus, probably more likely a Gore supporter than a second choice. In Minneapolis, the Minneapolis NPR News noted there were still, in a mayoral race that used ranked choice voting, this is one of the other cities that uses ranked choice voting, there were still attacks and private animosity between campaigns, but overall it was a remarkably positive campaign. Candidates said they didn't want to alienate each other's supporters for fear of losing out on second choice votes. At the end of their final debate, they even sang Kumbaya. Not figuratively, they literally sang Kumbaya. And all of these things add up to what I like to call the third-party viability feedback loop. What do I mean by that? Well, we start with ranked choice voting and the elimination of this spoiler effect. And as we saw, what this in turn means is more votes for third-party candidates, more candidates running as third parties, better media coverage for these candidates, a greater likelihood they participate in televised debates, all leading to greater support and greater viability in the voting booth, which in turn means more votes, more candidates, more media, more debates, more support, more viability, then more votes, more candidates, more media, more debates, and so on. And eventually, we hope, leading to providing a stepping stone to proportional representation in cycling, and allowing every party to be elected in proportion to their voter support. If you don't know what proportional representation is, we could go into that perhaps in questions later. And we get there with this ranked choice voting system, a system that eliminates spoilers and vote splitting, encourages more people to run, allows us to enjoy more positive campaigns, gives voters more choice and more voice, and will transform politics in Massachusetts, we believe. This is a system that is tested. In November, Maine became the first state in U.S. history to enact ranked choice voting for their state elections. This came after 12 years of an increasing number of wins at the local level. We're up to 11 cities now that use ranked choice voting for the municipal elections, 7 more that are awaiting implementation, that have enacted it but are awaiting implementation, for a total of 3.7 million Americans living in communities that use ranked choice voting. This is an actual ballot from Tacoma Park, Maryland. Fill in the bubble for your first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. A ballot from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where they also use it. A ballot from San Francisco, where they also use it. It's used in countries around the world. In total, 1.5 billion people live in countries that use some form of ranked choice voting. It's used by various private organizations. The Academy Awards uses it to choose the winners of the Oscars. Lots of colleges and universities use it, including many in Massachusetts, like Harvard, MIT, Tufts, Northeastern. And countless NGOs and professional organizations use it, including the National Association of Women, American Political Science Association, and so on. There's been a lot of research into the system. This isn't just hypotheticals. There's been real research backing up the results. Here's one paper by Professors Todd Donovan, Carolyn Tolbert, and Kellen Gracie, noting the increased civility between candidates when ranked choice voting is in place. They compared RCV cities to comparable non-RCV cities. And in their survey, in non-RCV cities, 25% of respondents said candidates were criticizing each other a great deal of the time, compared to only 5% in RCV cities. In non-RCV cities, only 12% said they weren't doing it all, compared to 36% in RCV cities. We see that increased voter participation and understanding of the system. This is a paper by Professor David Kimball at University of Missouri, St. Louis. The key takeaways from this is where ranked choice voting replaced, now when it's used in municipal elections, it has often replaced a primary and runoff. You don't need the primary and runoff, you can have a single ranked choice voting election. They saw a 10-point increase in turnout. They saw no change in the number of voter errors that were committed, and that it did not exacerbate any inequities in turnout and voter error. That is, if they had one population, say a low-income population, making more errors in plurality elections, that gap in how much in turnout and voter error did not increase when ranked choice voting was instituted. A lot of people ask about the cost. There's a fiscal statement from the cost for implementation in Maine. It would total 0.022% of the state's total budget, $3.2 billion, so negligible. In Massachusetts, we expect an even lower percentage of the budget, about $3 to $5 million in the first year, and under $1 million in subsequent years. So what about our campaign? What are we doing to make this happen? Well, we started after the November election with this big one in Maine. We called together people. We had a list of about 200 people, Adam, and called them to a small room in Boston. Chris Crawford showed up, Dan showed up. We packed that room with about 50 people. And today we have 7 regional chapters up and running across the country. Across the state, excuse me. We grew from that list of 200 people to 7,500 people today, 1,700 volunteers. We've raised over $40,000. This is a little dated. We've actually raised more than this. In June, we went to the Massachusetts Democratic Convention, and we got the Democratic Party to put it into their platform. We convinced enough delegates there to support it. And that means, for better or for worse, depending on your perspective, Democrats control the State House, and that means if you're an elected Democrat, you are supposed to support it because it's in your party platform now. We have endorsements from a number of organizations, including this one. Thank you. We're getting more endorsements every day. We have 2 bills in the State House. Just this week, we packed a State House hearing with between 40 and 50 supporters into a tight hearing room, and they went around the room, and people donning our t-shirts raised their hand to say where they were from. We had representation from across the entire state, and we made quite an impact at this hearing in support of these 2 bills. One bill is a local option bill that would make it easier for cities and towns to try out ranked choice voting, and another would enact what they did in Maine, which is to use ranked choice voting for all state elections. We have our eyes set on a ballot question in 2020. We'd like to get there. We have a plan to do it. We're trying to We have a plan for endorsements, for media hits, for signups, for fundraising, and everything. And how you can contribute, well, we have a number of ways. Sign up for our emails, like and share our stuff on social media, help us out running tables at events like these, making calls, becoming a public speaker, and giving money, of course. We need your money. We are trying to professionalize this organization. We want to hire a full-time organizer to do the stuff that we've been doing on a volunteer basis. We are all volunteer at this point. We are trying to raise $450,000 by January 2018 to fund the positions we need and do the kind of work we need to get to the point where we're ready to run that ballot question. And that's it. I'm happy to take your questions.
What are the advantages of ranked choice voting over instant runoff voting? That's my first question. And the second question is, why should vote tabulation machines be used at all, or even allowed if we're to have legitimate elections?
Good questions. So when we're talking about single winner elections, elections where we elect a single person, which are the vast majority of almost all elections in the United States are single winner elections, except for at-large races at the local level. In Boston, you elect 4 city councilors at once, or at-large city councilors at once. Ranked choice voting, when applied to elect a single person, is the same as instant runoff voting. They mean the same thing. Ranked choice voting is also an umbrella term to apply to electing multiple people at once. And when you use it to elect multiple people at once, you get the added advantage of proportional representation, of every constituency being represented in proportion to its voter support.
But it's not the same thing, because instant runoff has one round, whereas ranked choice, we have numerous rounds, at least 3 rounds.
Oh, no, instant runoff can have multiple rounds. You keep going until you, it's the same tabulation I showed.
Also, can I
But you can, it is
when we enacted it in San Francisco, we called it instant runoff, and the Department of Elections observed that it took them a week to actually go through the calculations, and that it was not instant, and it was making people cranky. It was called instant runoff, but it wasn't.
But there is a way to do it properly. I'm not talking
Yeah,
about the practice. The practice of corrupt election officials is one thing, but the actual proper performance of instant runoff voting is different.
For the single winner case, they are synonyms. Just so happens that ranked choice voting also.
Don't you sort of need a machine to have, or more likely to want a machine in order to count several rounds rather than doing it in a single round?
It helps to have software to do the tabulation for you.
But instant runoff voting, there's no need for it.
Well, it's the same thing. You don't absolutely need software or a machine to do the tabulation. You can hand count it, and there are places that do hand count it, but it is the same algorithm and it's the same tabulation.
No, it's longer than instant runoff voting can be done in a single round.
It's all done instantly.
It's all.
It's not the same.
Yes, Chris.
So I do not see how Cambridge City Council is proportional representation.
Okay.
I looked at Cambridge and I looked up the system, and I do not follow it. You can explain, I will. I do not feel like that's
So there are many different forms of proportional representation. Proportional representation is the idea that each constituency is represented, each in proportion to their voter support, the number of voters that support that ideology or party or whatever. There's many different ways to achieve proportional representation. A lot of European countries have party-based systems where you go in and you vote for a party, and if the party gets 20% of the vote, the party gets 20% of the seat. When you use ranked choice voting in a multi-member way, it's a candidate-based form where you're not as obviously going in and voting for a party, you're instead voting for candidates. But the threshold lowers. So in Cambridge, so in the single winner case we talked about the threshold for election is 50%, but in Cambridge the threshold for election is just 10%. You just need 10% of the voters to support you, to vote for you number one, to get a seat. And that means if there are 10% of the voting public in Cambridge is Libertarian, and they all vote for the Libertarian candidates at the top of the ballot, the Libertarian will get elected. And same with every other constituency. So it's lowering that threshold. It's no longer, if you look at at-large elections in Boston,
Okay,
yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
How is it not done when you, because I have actually never voted for a large number of people any other way than in Cambridge.
Yes.
You know, everywhere else I go.
The norm for at-large elections in Massachusetts, like if you go into Boston, you have, before at-large are elected, you get, it's called block voting or plurality at-large. You get 4 votes and you can use up to 4. And what that means, if you think about it, if you had 4 candidates of Party A and 4 candidates of Party B, and let's say 51% of the public subscribes to Party A and 49% of the public subscribes to Party B, what is the result from an at-large block voting election? 4 elected people from Party A. No proportionality. A majority gets 100% of the seats. In a proportional system, you're going to see something like 2-2. 2 from Party A, 2 from Party B. Or at the very least, 3-1. And that's what you would get from ranked choice voting when used for at-large elections. Yeah?
I'm partly curious about the current situation in Maine. Everywhere that I'm aware of that has ranked choice voting, it's only for nonpartisan elections. Has Maine actually applied it to partisan elections yet? Or is there anywhere else you're aware that's using it for partisan, party-labeled elections yet?
You're right. All of the existing uses at the city level are all for nonpartisan elections. They are, so Maine will be the first use to use it for partisan elections.
And when will that
Oh, that will be next year. Thank you.
What are the, you mentioned any of the criticisms of this, I'm just curious, what will be the primary criticism of ranked choice voting? And also, has there been any studies on the impact on campaign spending?
Good questions. So criticisms. We hear, oh, it's too complicated. It will be too costly to implement. It might elect extremists. None of those things are true. Impact on campaign spending. I have not seen that research yet. We believe that it decreases the influence of campaign spending. Because if you look at some of the races where people have won, like the mayor of Minneapolis, what she did is she ran, Betsy Hodges, who won in Minneapolis, she ran a very grassroots-oriented campaign, door to door, picking up, she had her core support of first choice voters, but she also, if she saw a campaign sign in the yard for a different candidate, she still went to that door and engaged with that voter. We picked up a lot of second and third and fourth place choices in a very kind of grassroots way. So the research isn't out yet, but we think it could increase the influence of big money. Yes?
What will happen in Maine with primary elections?
They will use ranked choice voting as well. So they're not getting rid of the primary. So you could in theory get rid of the primary. That is not our proposal because we think it's too difficult to do. And that is not what's going to be done in Maine. They're going to use ranked choice voting for the primaries, and they're going to use ranked choice voting for the general elections. And we've actually seen a number of primaries in Massachusetts where the winner of the primary doesn't get a majority. And the primary is in its own way spoiled. And that's actually one of the most frequent cases of non-majority outcomes in the state are in primaries. Yeah.
How does the Massachusetts campaign for this compare to other campaigns around the country?
Thank you for that question. Not at all planted. We are the most active ranked choice voting group in the country in this state. And we're all volunteer. better, except it hasn't worked anywhere yet.
Well, that doesn't mean it's not better. I mean, libertarians have never been elected, and they're better. It's just stands for use, it's not better.
Good point, touche. Yeah, no, totally fair. Totally fair.
My friend who would ask that question would not come to me.
Yeah, that's fine. So approval voting, people know what approval voting is? It's an interesting idea. You vote for, okay, you just vote for as many as you approve of, and that's it. So it hasn't caught on. It's been, and in places where it's used, once the election became a little bit competitive, it tended to be abandoned. So if you look at the Dartmouth trustees election, so at Dartmouth there happens to be a professor that's really gung-ho about approval. So they use it in Dartmouth alumni elections for trustees, and once the election became a little bit competitive, they found this dilemma around the bullet voting incentive. So the problem with approval is, you know you approve your first choice, right? You go, you get the ballot, you approve your first choice. Is it in your interest to approve of your second? Maybe. Is it in your interest to approve of your third, your fourth? When do you stop approving? That decision is highly strategic. It's a dilemma that you're placing the voter in, and it happens in at-large elections with block voting today. If you vote at-large in Boston, do I use one of my votes? 2? 3? Every additional vote that you cast hurts the chances the earlier choice, the person you like better, won't be elected. And
Candidates ask for a bullet vote.
yeah, and so we see this incentive to bullet vote. Candidates ask for bullet votes. When we educate about ranked choice voting, one of the common misconceptions we get is that if I rank my second choice, I'm going to somehow dilute the power of my first choice. That is not true. It always incentivizes you to keep ranking. Ranking a second does not hurt the chances of your first. Ranking a third does not hurt the chances of your first and second. And we have to, this is all about voter education. We're educating the voters. We've been successful at educating the voters in places it's been implemented. If we were to use approval or score or Condorcet or anything else, we would not be able to make that claim, because all those other systems suffer from this problem that voting theorists call later no harm, which is that a later choice hurts the chance of earlier choices elected. And that creates this incentive to bullet vote in campaigns advocating to their supporters to bullet vote. And it's a dilemma that we don't want to see the voter put in, because one of the fundamental selling points of changing the voting system is that you can vote your conscience. Finally, you can vote your conscience. And if we advocated one of these other forms, we wouldn't be able to say that.
You're right, because we just voted to approve the voting, and I exactly strategized. Who here strategized? You're not even
Yeah.
Could you talk about whether or not you think we'll actually get to see approval voting happen in Maine? I know there's a legal challenge.
Oh, ranked choice voting.
Oh, ranked choice voting, sorry.
I think we will. So what happened in Maine is that there was an advisory opinion, a non-binding opinion from the Supreme Court, that it was unconstitutional in a subset of the races for which the new law applied. Not all of the races, just a subset of them. The legislature has not acted on that advisory opinion, and it's still the law of the land, and it seems like it's too late for the legislature to do anything about it. They may still try to call some special session or something. So it is going forward. As far as we understand, it's going forward next year, and there will be some races held under ranked choice voting. Now, whether maybe there'll be some last-minute negotiation between the supporters and the opponents to say, we'll just do it for the races where there's not a constitutional question. But as of right now, it's going forward. It's the law of the land.
That's great.
So, just anecdotally on the ground in San Francisco when it went into effect, I did hear a fair bit of voter confusion from libertarians, from other people on the street that I was talking to, some of the misconceptions that you mentioned that you're addressing, and just like voters, average on-the-street voters, saying that they found it too complicated. But the research you cited said that there was not an increase in ballot spoilage or anything like that. Is there any sign of a lag time or a lead time that produces best results? Is there any sign of like a dip in valid ballots and a rise back up or anything like that?
In voter error rates, I'm not aware of research that compared it over time. So when that study was done, it had been 12 years that ranked choice voting had been in place in San Francisco, and maybe something more like 6 years that had been in place in Minneapolis. And Minneapolis had excellent voter education, and we're very happy with it. So Minneapolis is a model for how you should do voter education around this. So we saw people not making a lot of errors in Minneapolis after only 6 years. You know, after the first election, second election, how that compares to 6 years out, I'm not sure. Was there another part to that question?
No, just,
Okay.
that was it.
Yeah.
In states like Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Indiana, where they tend to have a lot of candidates for office, it seems like it's an excellent idea. In Massachusetts, we have a problem where we have a lot of candidates unopposed because of the bureaucracy, the requirements, and problems with being a candidate. What about in a state like New Hampshire, where in the state legislature, they have a district, or whatever you want to call it, that is several candidates getting elected? Would that be beneficial or harmful to that process?
Be very beneficial. I mean, if you used, so New Hampshire is one of the few places where they have multi-member districts. They, as you said, they're electing multiple state legislators from the same district. And that just cries out for proportional representation. I mean, if you're electing multiple people per district, why are you letting the majority control 100% of those seats? Those elected should reflect the diversity of the political opinion within that district. And if they used ranked choice voting, the multi-winner version, to elect all of them at once, they would get the proportional aspects of it.
Have you studied that to see if that's actually the case? Because it seems to work fairly well as getting some candidates elected who wouldn't be elected in single district ones like in Massachusetts.
That's true. I mean, part of that, I think, in New Hampshire is that they have such a big legislature for such a small state that it's just, it's almost difficult to like find enough candidates to run so everybody runs. And I think that's part of the story there, is that there's just, you know, so many people that can possibly run and win. But still, within that system, I would have to believe that a proportional system would do a better job of reflecting the diversity of the district.